February is done. February was the month of silence by Shusaku Endo. And this, like I said in my previous video, this is the third time I have read it, and I'm so happy to have read it just before Lent. Just briefly, this book was written by Shusaku Endo, who was a Japanese Catholic in the 20th century. And it follows the journey of two missionary priests, mainly that of Father Rodrigues and his companion, Father Garpe, and their journey to Japan, and to see basically what's going on there with the persecuted Japanese Christians, as well as what had happened to a colleague priest, Father Ferreira, who had apparently apostatized. This is such a wonderful book, and like I said, third time reading this, and I still get new things out of it that I've still learned new things reading it a third time. And I think it's one of those books that just gives you more and more the more you read it, basically. And there's so many things that you don't remember or you don't see the first time reading it. So I'm going to talk about those things that I didn't really see or notice the first two times I read it. So the first thing that I really, really loved is that throughout the book, Shusaku Endo describes the life of Christ, particularly the Passion, in great detail. Father Rodrigues meditates a lot on Christ and kind of compares what's going on in his journey. And what I really like about that is that you're taking on this journey of meditating through Christ's life. And I don't know why I never really realized that, but it's really, really wonderful to have the story intertwine with the life of Christ. And it's not separated. Those two things are not separated. For example, it's not just the story and then look Christ's life, let's meditate on Christ's life on the side and then go back to the story. No, it really is intertwined in the story, and that's something I really, really loved, being, I guess, because I'm a more devout Catholic this time around, and I've gotten older and wiser, I guess. That is something I really, really appreciate, because I know other books have done that, where they take another story from another story from a different story, certain aspects of a story from a different story, and then try to weave it into a book, but generally they're separate. But this was greatly intertwined, and that was wonderful. One of my favorite passages, spoiler alert if you don't want to know the end, but if you do, Father Rodrigues steps on the fumi. He apostatizes. The priest raises his foot. In it he feels a dull, heavy pain. This is no mere formality. He will now trample on what he has considered the most beautiful thing in his life, on what he has believed most pure, on what is filled with the ideals and the dreams of man. How his foot aches. And then the Christ in bronze speaks to the priest. Trample, trample. I more than anyone know of the pain in your foot. Trample. It was to be trampled on by men, and I was born into this world. It was to share men's pain that I carried my cross. The priest raises his foot on the fumi. Dawn broke, and far in the distance the cock crew. So just like with Peter, when Peter betrays Jesus, the cock crew 3 times. That's just one example. And yeah, biblical allusions are, especially in regards to Christ's life, is all over the book. And that's something I really, really love and appreciated this time around. Second thing, in the first 2 times I read it, I saw myself, a great deal of myself, in Kichijiro. Kichijiro is a Christian who has apostatized millions and millions of times because he Here's another passage that I really, really love that Kichijiro says, and this is something that I love about Shusaku Endo. He writes very human characters. At one point, Kichijiro says, "I was born weak. One who is weak at heart cannot die a martyr. What am I to do? Ah, why was I born into the world at all?" And we all have that moment of weakness. And some of us are weaker than others, and some of us are stronger than others in our faith, and it just begs the question sometimes, why? Yeah, it's kind of like, Job, why me? But, Lord, why would you make me so weak? But I guess it's just easier said than done to say, well, you got to rely on the Lord. You got to put your full trust in Him. And you recognize that, yes, you are weak, and therefore you need a Savior. But that is easier said than done, and that's what I love. And that's what I love about this book. It makes you question things that us who live in the West, who live as free Christians, basically, so many of the things that we're allowed to do as Christians, it begs the question, what would happen to us if all of a sudden it turned and we weren't allowed to worship as we were allowed to? And how many of us would actually stay as strong or do as we say? It's a good thing to think about. How many of us would do as we say, as we believe? So like I said, the first 2 times I read it, I saw myself a lot in Kichijiro, but this time I found myself a lot in Father Rodrigues. I didn't realize to what point he was very, very judgmental of everybody, and how he, in his idealization, is that a word? In his idealizing, martyrdom and what it means to be a Christian, the reality kicks in when things go awry. And it's much more difficult, but he still is a little stubborn and, very judgmental. I remember him judging Kichijiro. That's another passage I really like, judging Kichijiro. Could God make men as despicable as him? Something like that. At one point he says, could it be possible that Christ loved and searched after this dirtiest of men? And then later on it goes, our Lord had searched out the ragged and the dirty. Anyone could be attracted by the beautiful and the charming, but could such attraction be called love? True love was to accept humanity when wasted like rags and tatters. Once again near his face came the face of Christ wet with tears. When the gentle eyes looked straight into his, the priest was filled with shame. There have been so many moments where in my life, even as a Catholic now, it's really, really hard. I remember there's a saying by Chesterton, loving your neighbor, loving your enemy is hard because they're usually the same person or the same group of people. It is so hard to love your enemy at times, especially when you have this sense, this feeling, it's a bad feeling, of moral superiority, and we have to fight against that. That is pride, and it is wrong. Yes, you are to judge your neighbor by their actions, but not their heart, not who they are. And yes, Christ came for the broken, and that includes you. I think that's something that's hard for us to admit, is that person who we judge that is so awful in our eyes is just as bad as we are. We are just as bad as they are. We are not any better. We're all sinners. And that's a hard reality. We don't want to accept that they're like you and me. And as another part I really liked in the book, in the end, when after Father Rodrigues apostatized. He would meet with Father Ferreira once a month or something, and they would both be in the same garments. They both took Japanese wives. They both had Japanese names, and they both became collaborators with the Japanese. And he just hated what he, the fact that they were so similar in their sin and in how bad they were. A third thing I really liked this time, I actually paid attention a lot to chapter 10 and the appendix in the book. So the climax happens in chapter 9. The priest, Father Rodrigues, steps on the fumi. So he apostatizes. And after that, there's chapter 10 and the appendix. And those two things I never really paid attention to. I always kind of skipped. Because it's not... I learned that it's actually written... The appendix was written in a different form of Japanese, which we can't really see or detect in the English translation. But what I noticed this time... So I forced myself to really pay attention to chapter 10 and the appendix. So when Father Rodrigues apostatizes, the whole reasoning is that I'm going to save these 3 people from the pit, which is when they're hung upside down with a slit in their ear, so they slowly die. I'm going to save these 3 people from the pit. But what ends up happening is that they become collaborators with the Japanese government. In chapter 10, there is a part where they're explaining the different sort of holy objects that they would find in the junk on the ships, and Father Rodrigues and Father Ferreira would identify the holy objects. And at one point there was a family, a mother, a father, and a son, I believe, that was taken in by the government, tortured, and killed. So it shows the repercussions of their apostasy. Throughout the whole book, when the samurai the government comes and tries to make the Christians apostatize, they always do little things. Just step on it. Just step on the fumi. It's nothing. Even if you believe in it, it doesn't matter. If you just do it, we'll leave you alone. But it never ends there. It keeps going and going and going and going. So it's the same at the end when they apostatize, when Father Rodrigues steps on the fumi. It was not the end. I pray that our Protestant brothers and sisters read this, because in it a great thing, because like I said, they step on a fumi. It's an image. Images play a big role in this book, and I think in general, when it comes to Christian persecution, images play a big thing. For some reason, those who are against Christians, who want Christianity wiped out, images play a big role. For some reason, images are dangerous to them. And so I remember there's a part where Father Rodrigues and Father Garpe had rosary beads and images of Christ, and basically they took apart the rosary beads and gave it to the Christians because it was like the first holy object they had seen in so many years. The power of images is so important in our faith. Seeing God, seeing Christ, the crucifix, even heavenly hosts, angels, Mary, and all that is so important sometimes. Sometimes it's just seeing that one thing or holding that one thing in your hand is the thing that helps you keep going. And that, for our Protestant brothers and sisters, I pray you read this, because just like in communist China, and every time there's been actual persecutions, physical persecutions towards Christians, the opposing side always destroys churches. They vandalize churches and statues and holy objects, because these things are powerful. They help keep the faith alive. They help remind you, as well as the adversaries, that Christ came and died for you, and he is alive, that he is real. Persecution, if you think about it, would be ridiculous for someone who doesn't believe in God. Persecuting Christians, those persecuting Christians who don't believe in God, is kind of ridiculous, because if you don't believe in Christ, then what are you persecuting? They're persecuting because they know it is true. They are persecuting Christians because the truth is feared. Christian persecution, like I said, is happening everywhere in the world, even today. And the power of images, of holy images and holy objects, are so important at keeping the faith alive. And I can only pray that our brothers, Protestant brothers and sisters who don't understand that, come to understand that. I pray, if you haven't read it, please do read this. It's a wonderful book. And I'm probably going to read it next year, or maybe in 2 years' time. I don't know. I'll probably read it again. It is a book to read over and over again. If you haven't signed up yet, please do. Even if it's March, April, May, June, November, December. Maybe December is a little too late, but please sign up to the Catholic Reads 2023 Challenge. I would love to have you read with me, talk to you a bit, exchange ideas and passages on the Telegram group. So if you want to sign up, please do. I've put it in the description below. My name is Alexis. Thank you so much for joining me. And here is a snippet of Chapter 1 from Darwin's Black Box by Dr. Michael Behe. Darwin's Black Box, Chapter 1, Lilliputian Biology, The Limits of an Idea. This book is about an idea, Darwinian evolution, that is being pushed to its limits by discoveries in biochemistry. Biochemistry is the study of the very basis of life, the molecules that make up cells and tissues, that catalyze the chemical reactions of digestion, photosynthesis, immunity, and more. The astonishing progress made by biochemistry since the mid-1950s is a monumental tribute to science's power to understand the world. It has brought many practical benefits in medicine and agriculture. We may have to pay a price, though, for our knowledge. When foundations are unearthed, the structures that rest on them are shaken. Sometimes they collapse. When sciences such as physics finally uncovered their foundations, old ways of understanding the world had to be tossed out, extensively revised, or restricted to a limited part of nature. Will this happen to the theory of evolution by natural selection? Like many great ideas, Darwin's is elegantly simple. He observed that there is variation in all species. Some members are bigger, some smaller, some faster, some lighter in color, and so forth. He reasoned that since limited food supplies could not support all organisms that are born, the ones whose chance variation gave them an advantage in the struggle for life would tend to survive and reproduce, outcompeting the less favored ones. If the variation were inherited, then the characteristics of the species would change over time. Over great periods, great changes might occur. For more than a century, more scientists have thought that virtually all of life, or at least all of its most interesting features, resulted from natural selection working on random variation. Darwin's idea has been used to explain finch beaks and horse hoofs, moth coloration and insect slaves, and the distribution of life around the globe and through the ages. The theory has even been stretched by some scientists to interpret human behavior, why desperate people commit suicide, why teenagers have babies out of wedlock, why some groups do better on intelligence tests than other groups, and why religious missionaries forego marriage and children. There is nothing, no organ or idea, no sense or thought that has not been the subject of evolutionary rumination. Almost a century and a half after Darwin proposed his theory, evolutionary biology has had much success in accounting for patterns of life we see around us. To many, a triumph seems complete, but the real work of life does not happen at the level of the whole animal, or organ. The most important parts of living things are too small to be seen. Life is lived in the details, and it is molecules that handle life's details. Darwin's idea might explain horse hoofs, but can it explain life's foundation? Shortly after 1950, science advanced to the point where it could determine the shapes and properties of a few of the molecules that make up living organisms. Slowly, painstakingly, the structures of more and more biological molecules were elucidated, and the way they work inferred from countless experiments. The cumulative results show with piercing clarity that life is based on machines made of molecules. Molecular machines haul cargo from one place in the cell to another along highways made of other molecules, while still others act as cables, ropes, and pulleys to hold the cell in shape. Machines turn cellular switches on and off, sometimes killing the cell or causing it to grow. Solar-powered machines capture the energy of photons and store it in chemicals. Electrical machines allow current to flow through nerves. Manufacturing machines build other molecular machines as well as themselves. Cells swim using machines, copy themselves with machinery, ingest food with machinery. In short, highly sophisticated molecular machines control every cellular process. Thus, the details of life are finely calibrated, and the machinery of life enormously complex. Can all of life be fit into Darwin's theory of evolution? Because the popular media likes to publish exciting stories, and because some scientists enjoy speculating about how far their discoveries might go, it has been difficult for the public to separate fact from conjecture. To find the real evidence, you have to dig into the journals and books published by the scientific community itself. The scientific literature reports experiments firsthand, and the reports are generally free of the flights of fancy that make their way to the spin-offs that follow. But, as I will note later, if you search the scientific literature on evolution, and if you focus your search on the question of how molecular machines, the basis of life, developed, you will find an eerie and complete silence. The complexity of life's foundation has paralyzed science's attempt to account for it. Molecular machines raise an as yet impenetrable barrier to Darwinism's universal reach. To find out why, in this book I will examine several fascinating molecular machines, then ask whether they can ever be explained by random mutation/natural selection. Evolution is a controversial topic, so it is necessary to address a few basic questions at the beginning of the book. Many people think that questioning Darwinian evolution must be equivalent to espousing creationism. As commonly understood, creationism involves belief in an earth formed only about 10,000 years ago, an interpretation of the Bible that is still very popular. For the record, I have no reason to doubt that the universe is the billions of years old that physicists say it is. Further, I find the idea of common descent, that all organisms share a common ancestor, fairly convincing, and have no particular reason to doubt it. I greatly respect the work of my colleagues who study the development and behavior of organisms within an evolutionary framework, and I think that evolutionary biologists have contributed enormously to our understanding of the world. Although Darwin's mechanism, natural selection working on variation, might explain many things, however, I do not believe it explains molecular life. I also do not think it is surprising that the new science of the very small might change the way we view the less small.